Q Review Print Speaking to the Blind, celebrating 40 years of audio newspaper production. Welcome to this week's edition of the Herald Scotland podcast, recorded at the Bishop Briggs Media Centre by our amazing volunteers. You can get in touch with us via Facebook, Twitter or Instagram using @CuneReview, that is @CuandReview. You can also contact us directly by emailing information@cunereview.com. That is INFORMATION@CuandReview.com, or by calling 0141 772 3976. That's 0141 772 3976.
The Herald Scotland, on Wednesday the 19th of February 2025. From the news section. Detectorists unearth treasure trove of medieval coins in the Borders. This article has been written by Jodie Harrison and it's being read by me, Corey. Two metal detectorists are celebrating the find of a lifetime after unearthing a treasure trove of medieval coins. Keith Young and Lisa Stevenson discovered the 30 gold and silver coins during a sweep of a field in the Borders. The cache of currency, which includes groats, demis and half-demis, from both Scotland and England, had been buried in the Capper Clutch area sometime in the mid-15th century. After bringing it to light, the pair said they hoped it could be bought by a museum and put on display. The coin trove includes English silver groats minted by Henry V, 1413 to 1422, to Edward IV, 1461 to 1483, and Scottish gold demi and half-demis of James I, 1406 to 1437, and James II, 1437 to 1460. Keith said, "Lisa and I have been lucky enough to have found some wonderful artefacts while metal detecting, but nothing quite prepared us for a find like this. Hopefully the hoard will go on public display for others to enjoy." Lisa added, "The hoard is the find of a lifetime, and being part of the excavation with the National Museum and Treasure Trove team was an amazing experience. Something we will never forget." The find was reported to the Treasure Trove Unit, TTU, who assess all Scottish archaeological finds, and it will soon be referred to the Scottish Archaeological Finds Allocation Panel, SAFAP, an independent panel where it will be assigned a monetary value to be paid to the finders in the form of an ex gratia reward. Accredited museums who wish to acquire the find can apply to SAFAP and will be required to raise the funds for the ex gratia award. Anthony Lee from the Treasure Trove Unit said, "Coin hoards contain a mix of both English and Scottish coins are not unusual, but we do not see many hoards from this period in Scotland, so it's a fascinating find." Keith and Lisa acted promptly and correctly in reporting it to us. In turn, along with archaeologists from the National Museum of Scotland, we were able to attend and excavate the site, finding 5 more coins and documenting the circumstances of the hoard alongside the finders. The coins will now progress through the treasure trove system and, following further study, be made available for accredited museums to acquire through the Scottish Archaeological Finds Allocation Panel, SAFAP, in due course. I would also like to add a little extra something in there, which is if you ever find yourself finding some sort of archaeological discovery, please make sure not to move it, as the information of the location that it is found is very helpful for archaeologists. Instead, please contact the Treasure Trove Unit, TTU, or in the future, the Scottish Archaeological Finds Allocation Panel, the SAFAP. That article was from the Herald Scotland. It was from the news section. It was written by Jodie Harrison, and it was read by me, Corey. The Herald Scotland, on Wednesday the 19th of February 2025. From the news section. Militant vegetarian sentenced for animal raising Muller dairy blockade. This article has been written by Jodie Harrison, and it's being read by me, Corey. A militant vegetarian from Scotland has been fined and sentenced to carry out community service over her part in the blockade of a dairy plant in England. Kat Chan from Glasgow was ordered to carry out 250 hours of unpaid work and pay a £1,500 fine after joining an animal raising protest which targeted Muller's site in Droitwich in 2022. Along with co-accused Ben Patterson, 31, of Sunderland, the 23-year-old activist was convicted of conspiracy to commit criminal damage. Chan was also convicted of having an article with intent to destroy or damage property. Patterson was found guilty of intentionally or recklessly causing a public nuisance. Both had denied the charges. 5 more defendants were sentenced earlier with community service orders ranging from 120 to 240 hours. Protesters climbed onto trucks, milk silos and loading bays, while some glued themselves to the ground and chained themselves to fences, during a campaign to encourage people to eat plant-based food, Worcester Crown Court was told. Their actions were part of a week-long series of protests targeting dairy giants Muller, Arla and Freshway dairy facilities, which immobilised dairy trucks and led to milk shortages. Campaigners cited the degrading impact of animal farming on the climate, as well as the inhumane treatment of cows in the dairy industry as justification for their actions. Supporters said they took action in 2022 to highlight the dairy industry and animal agricultural contribution to the ongoing climate and ecological crisis. That article was from the Herald Scotland. It was from the news section. It was written by Jodie Harrison, and it was read by me, Corey. The Herald Scotland, on Wednesday the 19th of February 2025. From the news section. Pensioner charged over 5 hate crime posters. This article has been written by Mark McDougall, and it's being read by me, Corey. Police have arrested and charged a pensioner in connection with hate crime offences in Fife. Officers have been investigating a number of reports of offensive posters being displayed in local areas, including Kirkcaldy, Levenmouth and Glen Rothes. The first of them was found at a bus shelter at around 10 a.m. on January 30th, before more were reported to police on February 4th in 2 different locations. At the time, police said all of the posters contained content of racially offensive nature, and were seized by officers. A 72-year-old man has now been arrested and charged over the posters and will appear at Kirkcaldy Sheriff Court on Wednesday, February 19th. Inspector Matt Spencer said, "We understand the distressing impact these incidents have had on our communities, and I would like to thank the public for their support with our inquiries. Police Scotland takes reports of hate crime very seriously, and our officers are committed to ensuring this will not be tolerated. I would encourage anyone to report this type of crime to police by calling 101. That article was from the Herald Scotland. It was from the news section. It was written by Mark McDougall, and it was read by me, Corey. The Herald Scotland, on Wednesday the 19th of February 2025. From the news section. SNP's Graham Day to step down as MSP in 2026 election. This article has been written by Mark McDougall and it's being read by me, Corey. Scotland's Higher Education Minister, Graham Day, has announced he will be stepping down as an MSP next year. Mr Day has been an MSP since first being elected in 2011, but he has made the decision not to seek nomination for the 2026 Holyrood elections. He pointed to the fact he would be approaching his 69th birthday when the 2031 election came around, and believes he is unable to make that commitment. He will have been the Angus South MSP for 15 years when he steps down, and vows to continue working hard until he leaves the role. In a statement, he said, "It has been my absolute privilege to serve the people of Angus South and represent the SNP in the Scottish Parliament for the past 14 years, and to have been afforded an honour of serving as a Scottish Government Minister under 3 different First Ministers is beyond anything I could have imagined when I was first elected in 2011. However, I have informed the Angus South Constituency Association of my decision not to seek the nomination to be the SNP candidate in 2026. Were I to be successfully re-elected, serving a further 5-year term would see me approaching my 69th birthday when the 2031 elections came around, and that's not a commitment I feel I'm able to make. Be assured, however, I will continue to give my absolute best as an MSP and Government Minister over the coming 14 months, and playing my part in seeking to deliver an SNP victory here in Angus South and across Scotland in 2026. And beyond that, I will remain a resolute campaigner for independence." That article was from the Herald Scotland. It was from the news section. It was written by Mark McDougall and it was read by me, Corey.
From the Herald Scotland of Wednesday the 26th of February 2025 from the Voices section. Don't sign the death warrant for the south of Mull. This article is by Garrett Stell. When I was 11, I was a happy child. I had friends, I had a happy home, and I never found school a struggle. Shortly after my 12th birthday, I was sent to board away from home. People assume that either my family is wealthy, and it was a private school, or that I had misbehaved and been sent away. This wasn't the case. It was a council-run hostel. My catchment high school was so far away I couldn't travel every day. I live on the island of Mull, which has its own high school, but unfortunately for me, in the 1970s, the decision was made to build it in the north of the island, which excluded the southern children from attending. I went from a happy child who was doing well in education to a depressed, underweight, unwell child who struggled to attend school at all in the first 2 years. I was genuinely so mentally and physically unwell, it was impossible for me to attend. When I did go, all I did was cry, and the teachers would send me out of class. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, and I couldn't stop crying. After the sadness came the anger and resentment. I felt my family had rejected me. I rebelled, as can be seen as the norm for teenagers, but in fact my rebelling wasn't just drinking and not going to school. It was also self-harming, a secret I have kept until writing this letter. This wasn't just temporary. This continued into my 20s until I reached out for help. Suicidal ideations were not uncommon for me. I felt so angry and I hated myself. I felt I had no home, and the home I did have, I wasn't allowed to live there. Even if I was allowed, I felt so rejected I didn't want to be there anyway. I continued in high school until the 6th year. By this point, I rarely went home at the weekends. I rejected Mull as my home, as I felt it had rejected me. I then left for college and stayed away. I struggled to even return for visits or special occasions. It triggered something in my head that I just didn't want to feel. I dropped out of higher education. My head was a mess. I resented education and what it meant to me. I spent my 20s searching for something but never knowing what it was. I was just searching desperately for love and that feeling of having a home. Now, as a mum myself, I have returned. I faced my fears, and after searching for many, many years for my home, I realized it was on Mull all along. I am happy to be home at long last. It's been a long time since I was 11 and happy, and I moved back knowing it wouldn't be forever, as I wouldn't send my children away to face what I did. But the possibility of the new high school being built centrally brought some hope that maybe, just maybe, I wouldn't have to leave home again and my children could stay here too. However, the council has yet again decided to forget about us and disregard our children's future. I don't get a rerun. I will never know how my life would have turned out if I had the chance of a normal education and home life. Maybe I would have got my degree, reached my full potential, been able to form healthy relationships, and maybe I wouldn't still be dealing with poor mental health. What I do know is that my children will never experience that. Not because the council have learned from their mistakes, not because all the talk of mental health in recent years has been listened to. No, it's because I would rather uproot our happy, stable lives to save my children from the trauma the council inflicted upon me. My parents are amazing parents. They did what they could to support me. This isn't an attack on them. It isn't an attack on other parents who make that difficult decision to send their kids to the hostel. Everyone has their own reasons, and it doesn't always turn out the way it did for me. Sometimes it's impossible to move away. Sometimes they think it's what's best, and that's okay. This isn't an attack on the amazing workers in the hostel who became a surrogate parent to me. Their job isn't easy, and I always remember them fondly. What's not acceptable in 2025 is not having the option to send our children to secondary education and have a home life. The council knows better and so should do better by our children. The reason they are refusing to help is because a split-site campus where Tobermory keeps their primary and ELC, as they should, and we have a central secondary site, will cost an extra £12 million. We have yet to see the calculations to back this figure up. It begs the question, does the council want the south end of Mull to become only for tourists and the retired community? Are they driving us out on purpose, or do they just not care about us at all? I don't know which is worse. This isn't just about a new school, it's about a community who have had generations of hurt. The population is in decline. Soon there will be no one left to work in the shop, to run and use local businesses, and to look after the elderly. Councillors, please don't sign the death warrant for the south of Mull, which having the Mull campus in Tobermory is effectively doing. I don't want to be forced to leave home again. The clock is ticking for these children and their future. The clock is ticking for our community. That article was by Garrett Stell. This is from the Herald Scotland of Wednesday, the 26th of February 2025, from the business section. Bid to raise homeless tax as Scott's care body is in financial trouble. This article is by Martin Williams. Demands are being made to end a tax on the homeless living in emergency accommodation, as the Glasgow care body responsible to housing the disadvantaged is plunged into financial trouble, trying to fill a funding gap of £116 million over 3 years. Plans are in place to increase charges on the homeless living in temporary accommodation by 5.2%, as the Joint Council, an NHS body that delivers health and social care services in and around Glasgow, seeks to recover from a huge overspend in the housing emergency. There are concerns over the millions in debt being incurred by the homeless for living in temporary accommodation, because housing benefit will not always cover it. An audit of the Glasgow City Integration Joint Board, which is responsible for ensuring the homeless have a roof over their heads, carried out by accounting firm EY, warns that there is a risk that its sustainable financial plan is not achievable. Questions are being raised about the scandalous chasing of temporary homeless accommodation debt in Scotland, and housing campaigners say there has to be a rethink over the charges to the homeless. Ministers have so far refused to intervene over an outstanding debt incurred by the homeless for temporary accommodation in Scotland, estimated at more than £33 million 4 years ago. Those charges often arise when housing benefits provided by the Department for Work and Pensions do not cover the full cost of temporary housing, leading to substantial arrears. According to a legal service agency, LSA, examination of local authority practice from 2021, charging for temporary homeless accommodation varies across Scotland, resulting in a postcode lottery for individuals. The typical amount owed to the 30 local authorities who provided data was £1,286,067. Reported outstanding debt ranged from zero in East Lothian to £12.7 million in Edinburgh. In 2020, 5,735 people were charged for temporary accommodation in Glasgow, of whom 510 made payment direct to the local authority. The council received £21,358,553 in income, and at December the 31st, 2020, was owed a total of £5,163,685 in arrears. Housing campaigners have raised concerns that local authorities do not take individual circumstances into account. The practical implications of the current system are that charges are unaffordable, leaving many people with high levels of personal debt, leading to considerable hardship for individuals who find themselves in this situation, as well as contributing to mental health issues, they say. Now Glasgow City councillors are being asked to approve an average weekly charge for people in temporary furnished accommodation of £188.39, a rise of 5.2%. The increase will also apply to hostel rents, with a weekly charge of £429.54 for the Chara Centre, Elder Street, James Maclean, Rodney Street, Maxwell Drive and Portman Street. Pat Toher, the Chief Officer of the Glasgow City Health and Social Care Partnership, which administers social care, addiction, homelessness support, child protection and criminal justice services, said the rent charge reflects the costs directly associated with the provision of the accommodation. And she has admitted that there is an issue in recovering housing benefit money from people in hostels which are leased. There is a cap on the amount of housing benefit subsidy they can recover of £88.27 per room per week. It is further admitted that there will be issues in recovering the money due to the difference between the cost of provision of temporary furnished flats and hostels and housing benefit subsidy, which will require to be managed within the budget. In her argument for putting up the charges, she said in an analysis that is being put to councillors, "In fixing the rent charges, we believe that a reasonable amount is based on charges which allow for cost recovery." The Scottish Government Code of Guidance states that when providing temporary accommodation to the homeless, a local authority can ask them to pay a reasonable charge for the accommodation, taking into account what they can afford to pay in the long term, with an expectation that housing benefit from the DWP will cover it. But she says it has been decided to recommend a reasonable charge which reflects the cost of providing the accommodation. The cost of the provision of the pool of temporary furnished flats in 2025 to 26 to be met by rental income was estimated to be £17.275 million. According to a financial examination by accounting firm EY, carrying out work for the Accounts Commission Public Spending Auditor as of March 2024, an IJB funding gap of £116 million over 3 years was identified. Service cuts totalling £14 million were identified in 2024-25, amidst a savings target of £29.9 million to allow the IJB to boost its levels of reserves, which have to be held by public bodies to deal with unforeseen events or emergencies and manage financial risks from year to year. But the board's projections at November 2024 highlighted that unachieved savings contributed to a projected budget overspend of £17.5 million. As of March the 31st, 2024, reserves had fallen to just £8.4 million, representing 0.5% of its spending, and significantly below the board's target of 2%. At March 31st, 2022, the IJB had a reserve of £28.6 million. Any further use of the general reserves will make responding to future financial pressures increasingly challenging, particularly in 2026-27 and beyond, including global prices in prescribing and the impact of national insurance contribution increases to both in-house service provision and external service provision, the audit warned. There is therefore a risk that the IJB's reserves will be exhausted in the medium term and that a sustainable financial plan is not achievable. The IJB was warned the IJB must ensure that financial management arrangements prioritise general reserve balances. Further use of reserves to meet cost pressures is unsustainable. The Scottish Tenants Organisation said debts incurred by the homeless as a result of the charges should be waived. To set extortionate weekly charges for vulnerable homeless people in Glasgow in 2025 during a housing and homeless emergency is nothing short of daylight robbery, when many homeless people, even with housing benefit, will not be able to afford these charges, it said. The IJB's own risk register, as of December, classifies as critical and almost certain that there will be an inability to deliver the appropriate level of essential services due to required annual level of savings. It says the effect of this would be an inability to meet demand for services, failing to ensure safety and prevent harm to service users, and failing to meet legal requirements. It registers an identical classification for dealing with homelessness pressures. It says there is a risk that the IJB will be unable to achieve its strategic priorities where these are dependent on the objectives to support people at risk of homelessness and support the provision of safe housing for Glasgow's residents, and contribute to the role the city is playing in supporting people seeking asylum and refuge to live in Glasgow. STO campaign coordinator Sean Clerkin said, "Glasgow City Council must immediately cut the charges so that we can get all homeless people into emergency temporary accommodation, as is their legal right, as Glasgow City Council has a woeful record in that regard. This shameful state of affairs has to be stopped now." The Scottish Government-funded body, which is directly accountable to the Scottish Parliament, has already set engagement plans for Glasgow City Council and the City of Edinburgh Council over its handling of the homeless. Both have registered housing emergencies. A Glasgow City Council spokesman said, "The local authority has a statutory duty under Section 29 of the Housing Scotland Act 1987 to provide emergency accommodation to households where it has reason to believe that they are homeless. Homelessness services utilise a range of accommodation resources in order that people can access emergency accommodation at the point of need. Councils are permitted to make a reasonable charge for the provision of temporary homeless accommodation, and rent charges are set by committee each year. The guiding principle adopted by Glasgow in setting the charge per unit is to set a charge which reflects the cost to the council in providing interim homeless accommodation. Many, if not all, our tenants will be eligible for support through housing benefit, which will be the full amount. HSCP staff will support households placed in temporary accommodation to apply for housing benefit and any other benefit that may be applicable." The article was by Martin Williams. This is from the Herald Scotland of Wednesday, the 26th of February 2025, from the business section. Gender balance on the horizon, but a lack of women in top jobs. This article is by Christy Dorsey. Women occupied 43.4% of boardroom positions among the UK's largest 350 listed companies in 2024, up from 42.1% the previous year. But the meagre number of female chief executives fell. The figure of 43.4% represents a new all-time high, according to the government-backed FTSE Women Leaders Review, and is a steep increase from the 24.5% recorded in 2017, when the review was launched. The proportion of women in the boardroom was even higher among the 100 biggest listed companies at 44.7%, compared to 42.6% in 2023. But when it came to those in decision-making leadership positions, as opposed to non-executive directors, the proportion of women fell to 35.3%, though this too improved from the previous year when 34.5% of CEOs, chief financial officers, and those directly reporting to the leaders were women. At the very top, the review reveals that the number of female chief executives in the FTSE 350 fell from 20 to 19, or 0.5% of the total. There were 9 female chief executives among the FTSE 100, along with 28 finance directors and 16 chairs. Overall progress has been achieved despite more firms looking to weed out costly or ineffective diversity goals, according to the chief executive of the FTSE Women's Leaders Review. In the US, a number of large organizations such as Google, Meta, Amazon, and McDonald's have scaled back diversity programs amid political pressure following Donald Trump's presidential election victory. You can't ignore the fact that there's a lot of questioning going on, particularly from across the ocean, in relation to DEI, diversity, equality, and inclusion. Vivienne Arts told the PA news agency. But she added that the Women Leaders Review was really pleased and impressed with the willingness of companies to share their data, so we haven't encountered any resistance in the UK. The government said overall progress was positive given the UK's voluntary approach to diversity. This is in contrast to countries such as France and Belgium, which have mandatory quota systems for women on boards at publicly listed companies. About 100 of the top 350 listed companies still had fewer than a third of their leadership positions occupied by women, but almost 3/4 were meeting or exceeding the UK's 40% target. Among the UK's largest private companies, the proportion of women on the boards of directors stood at 31%. The listed firms with the highest proportion of female leaders include retailers Marks & Spencer, Next and Burberry, and publishing giants Pearson and Bloomsbury, all of which have more than 50% female representation. The UK is leading the charge for gender equality in boardrooms, but we cannot rest on our laurels, said Chancellor Rachel Reeves, the first ever woman to hold that role. We must break down the barriers that stop many women being represented in decision-making roles, so that top talent reaches the highest levels of leadership in businesses driving economic growth across Britain. That article was by Christy Dorsey.
From the Herald Scotland, Thursday the 20th of February, from the news section. Calmac service is disrupted as heavy winds and rain hit parts of Scotland. Article by Mark McDougall. A number of ferry routes are being adversely affected by the strong winds and heavy rain hitting parts of Scotland. Calmac has revealed that 28 out of the 30 routes are facing disruptions via their website, with the Met Office issuing a yellow warning for wind and rain over the next couple days. No warnings are in place today despite the high winds in coastal areas, but there is warning for wind and rain in Dumfries and Galloway, Ayrshire, Agnes, Perth and Kilnross and Aberdeenshire on Friday. Calmac has been updating travellers on the disruption with a number of services cancelled this morning and reviews to take place on others throughout the day. That includes services between Mallaig and Oban, as well as Benary and Levenburg, while others between Gourock and Dunoon are at risk and liable to severe delays and cancellations throughout the day. A Met Office spokesperson said, southerly winds will increase on Friday morning with gusts of 50 to 60 miles per hour likely for exposed coasts and hills of western Britain. Some parts of the warning area may see gusts of 70 miles per hour for a time. Winds ease from the west during the afternoon. Following a wet few days, further spell of heavy rain are expected through the course of Friday. High ground is likely to see the highest rainfall totals, with 30 to 40 millimetres possible in the space of 6 hours or so, and close to 70 millimetres by the time the rain eases on Friday evening. And that article was written by Mark McDougall and read by me, Arden. From the Herald Scotland, Thursday the 20th of February, from the news section. Falkirk Food Bank devastated after fifth break-in in a year. Article by Gabriel McKay. A food bank in Falkirk has been left reeling after fifth break-in little over a year. Opened in 2012, last year the organisation on Tamforhill Avenue provided food parcels for 8,132 people last year, including 2,414 children. On Monday, it was robbed for the fifth time since January 2024, with food and equipment stolen. According to the local security company, it's the commercial property with the highest number of break-ins in Falkirk in the recent years. Harrison Crawford, manager of the food bank, told the Herald, "This was our fifth break-in since January 2024. It's not just what's been stolen, but the cost of the repairs and the cost of adding security, and obviously the frustration. It's been a big issue for us. We've had to block up windows, cut down a tree, we had a 3-day-old laptop stolen, we've had food taken, and also things for people in really bad situations, like microwaves, kettles and air purifiers. You're talking a few thousand just on cameras, boarded up windows and replacing the stuff that's been stolen, adding sensors. We really want to say though that the community and local businesses have been really good. When the laptops are stolen, local businesses around our food bank heard about it, including a security company, and they got together and brought us new laptops. The security company has always tried to give us a good price and have always given us more than we paid for. Our volunteers help us to top up the shelves again, so there's been a financial hit in the few thousands, but it could be a lot worse without the people in the community. The spate of break-ins don't appear to be random attacks by opportunist thieves, but rather the work of experienced criminals. Mr. Crawford says, they come down from the roof, then they go onto the roof and cover our camera with ivy and break open the skylight. We've had reinforced fiberglass installed, but they still get in. On the last break-in, they smashed the sensors so the alarm wouldn't go off. We've had police, crime scene officers, security engineers come in to do what we can to increase security, and it's just continuing. It's people who know what they're doing, and we think it's the same people. Each time they come, they find out a bit more, learn where the cameras and sensors are. To be able to break in the way they did the first time is clearly someone who knows what they're doing, and you just feel helpless because they know how to counteract the measures they put in to prevent it. Whilst the community has been vital in helping to mitigate the effects of the break-ins, it's also some of the most vulnerable people in Falkirk who are being stolen from. Mr. Crawford says, it's not just my food bank or the board's food bank, it's a community's food bank, and we're just there to look after it. We provide 7 days worth of food for people who are homeless, people fleeing domestic abuse, people who have lost their jobs, people who have come here seeking asylum. That's who they're stealing from. The community around us, helping to try and prevent this, is what keeps us going and inspires us. And that article was written by Gabrielle McKay and read by me, Adam.
From the Herald Scotland, Friday the 21st of January, from the sports section, Rodgers reveals Celtic's unique response to European exit. Report by Josh McCafferty. Celtic manager Brendan Rodgers has revealed that he and his players had a beer after their heartbreaking Champions League exit on Tuesday. The Parkhead side looked all but set to take Bayern Munich to extra time at the Alliance Arena until Alphonso Davies popped up in the dying embers of the game to win the tie for the German Giants. It was a gut-wrenching way for Celtic's European campaign to come to an end. Boss Rodgers has since revealed how he and his players drowned their sorrows after the two-legged loss. We went back to the hotel, we had a beer and then got back to training the next day, he said. They very rarely get the chance to do that, very rarely get the chance. Don't worry, it wasn't a typical Scottish night, it wasn't what you would consider. It was a nice relaxed beer and wine, and then we trained the next day, stayed overnight, trained the next day and getting ready for Hibs. It's very important that you can just reflect a little bit and relax and think about the moments within the game and the performance, but very quickly you have to move on. It remains to be seen whether Celtic will suffer for a hangover from the Bavarian beers against in-form Hibernians at Easter Road on Saturday. Rodgers' men travelled to Leith, aiming to get back to winning ways and maintain their 13-point lead at the top of the Scottish Premiership. And that article was written by Josh McCafferty. From the Herald Scotland, Saturday the 22nd of February, from the news section. 3 arrested on suspicion of murder in Robert Scott Clive case. Report by Jodie Harrison. 3 people have been arrested on suspicion of murder more than 20 years after Robert Scott Clive went missing in North East England, Northumbria police said. Mr Clive, 30, originally from Stranraer, Dumfries and Galloway, was living in North Shields when he vanished on the night of October the 10th, 2002. The disappearance of Mr Clive, who was known as Scott, prompted police to launch a murder investigation, but his body was never found. Northumbria police said on Saturday that new information led them to arrest 3 people, 2 men aged in their 40s and 50s, and a woman aged in her 40s, who remain in police custody. An address in the Coronation Street area of North Shields, which Mr Clive is known to have visited on the night he went missing, has also been searched, the force added. The current occupant of the searched property, who moved in after 2002, has been put in alternative accommodation while police carry out their inquiries, the force said. Mr Clive was last seen alive in the Coronation Street area shortly after 11 p.m. on October the 10th, 2002. Unconfirmed sightings in the early hours of the following morning also placed a man matching Mr Clive's description near the banks of the River Tyne. Detective Inspector Mark Atherton, who is leading in the case, said, "We're doing everything we can to provide Scott's family with the answers they deserve. Upon receiving new information, we have taken the decision to arrest 2 men and a woman in relation to Scott's disappearance. They remain in custody while our inquiries are ongoing. However, we still believe there could be key information that people know in the local community. I am again urging anybody who lived in Coronation Street at the time of his disappearance or has information about Scott's movements that night to come forward. The information you have could prove key in our investigations." Police say they've reviewed hundreds of hours of CCTV footage and spoken to various witnesses since they lodged their investigation more than 20 years ago. Potential witnesses are asked to get in touch with Northumbria Police by phone or through social media, quoting case reference number NP-202-407-03-0398. In the article written by Jodie Harrison. From the Herald Scotland, Sunday the 23rd of February 2025, from the news section. Abortion buffer zone activists wave of MAGA abuse after Vance speech. Report by Jodie Harrison. Campaigners who called for buffer zones to be created around hospitals to stop women facing anti-abortion protesters have said they faced a torrent of abuse after a speech by US Vice President J.D. Vance, which spread falsehoods about how the law is applied. Writing in the Herald, Back Off Scotland co-founder Lucy Grieve said that the group had been targeted online by right-wing supporters of the Make America Great Again, MAGA, movement in the days after Mr Vance's speech. Earlier this month, the American wrongly claimed that the Scottish Government had begun distributing letters to residents in the buffer zones, warning them that even private prayer within their own homes may amount to breaking the law and to report any fellow citizens suspected guilty of thought crime. Ms Black said that the group were used to facing abuse from anti-abortion campaigners, including threats of litigation, accusations of murder and menacing phone calls in the middle of the night. However, the temperature and tone of the invective skyrocketed in the wake of Mr Vance's comments. Ms Grieve said, "None of this was as bad as the torrent of online abuse we have received from President Trump's Make America Great Again, MAGA supporters over the past week, all stemming from a falsehood spread by US Vice President J.D. Vance." She added, "Whilst we are no strangers to online abuse, the wave of harassment we faced following these erroneous claims were on another level entirely. Somehow, our campaign found itself in the crosshairs of MAGA supporters and the floodgates opened. Swaves of abusive comments, messages and emails appeared in our inbox over the last week, many from nameless, faceless accounts that existed solely to spread vitriol and target opponents of Trump and Vance. The campaigner had said she had now fears that women may be put off coming forward with their own testimonies, while activists' safety could be put at risk. She said, "I worry that in light of attacks like this one from J.D. Vance, women will be put off from sharing their experiences out of fear. I believe we are at risk of losing the powerful, first-hand accounts that are crucial in igniting social movements and helping to shape policy and public opinion because of the fear of the backlash from the right. With an increasing trend of right-wing figures, like Vance or Musk, using falsehoods to stoke outrage and mobilise their bases, this is often occurring at the expense of the truth and the safety of activists." During his speech, Mr Vance said, "Now, I wish I could say that this was a fluke, a one-off, crazy example of a badly written law being enacted against a single person. But no. This last October, just a few months ago, the Scottish Government began distributing letters to citizens whose houses lay within so-called safe access zones, warning them that even private prayer within their own homes may amount to breaking the law. Naturally, the government urged readers to support any fellow citizens suspected guilty of thought crime. In Britain and across Europe, free speech, I fear, is in retreat. SNP MSP Neil Gray later branded the claims were ludicrous and wrong in an interview with STV. A pensioner became the first person in Scotland to be arrested under the law banning protests outside hospitals this week after the 40 Days for Life group resumed their prayer vigils in Glasgow. Police said that a 74-year-old was detained at the Hardgate Road area of Glasgow, opposite the Queen Elizabeth Hospital on Wednesday afternoon. And that report was by Jodie Harrison. From the Herald Scotland, Sunday the 23rd of February, from the news section, Keir Starmer dodges question on clarifying Equality Act. Article written by political editor Andrew Learmonth. Sir Keir Starmer has said he expects public bodies to follow the law on single-sex spaces. However, the Labour leader swerves questions on what his government would do if the Supreme Court rules that anyone with a gender recognition certificate is legally a woman. The Prime Minister was speaking to journalists at the Scottish Labour conference in Glasgow on Sunday when he was asked about the Sandy Peggy case. The nurse has taken the NHS Fife to a tribunal after she was suspended following a complaint about having to use the same changing room as Dr Beth Upton, a trans woman. John Swinney has been unwilling to comment on the issue, saying he would be in breach of the law to do so as it is still in front of a judge. However, he did say he agreed with his deputy Kate Forbes, who told the Herald of her unequivocal support for single-sex spaces. Meanwhile, the UK Supreme Court is soon to make a ruling in a legal battle between the Scottish Government and Campaigners for Women Scotland about the definition of a woman in law and whether someone who is biologically male can be legally regarded as female for the purposes of the Equality Act. If they uphold a December 2022 decision by Lady Haldane that sex is not limited to biological or birth sex but includes those in possession of a GRC, then that could mean single-sex exemptions will no longer apply to biological sex. The only way to alter that will be by changing the UK-wide Equality Act. Speaking to journalists at Scottish Labour's conference in Glasgow, the Prime Minister was asked about both the tribunal and if he would clarify the law if the Supreme Court backed the Scottish Government. Sir Keir said he was aware of the case but was not across all details, as he had been very focused on Grangemouth and Ukraine. But I'm aware of things, but I don't know every twist and turn in the case, and I do believe the government should enforce safe spaces for women and the Equality Act, and I think the government should follow the law. I think that's straightforward. The Money Blackburn Mackenzie Policy Collective said the Prime Minister would be well advised to make it a priority to get across the details of the Supreme Court case, given that a ruling is expected imminently. They added, if the court rule in favour of the Scottish Government, there will be a host of adverse consequences for women, as the EHRC has already pointed out. In his speech to conference, the Prime Minister criticised both the SNP and the Tories, but his strongest criticism was aimed at Nigel Farage and Reform UK. They claim to be a party of patriotism, but they're fawning over Putin, he said. No, they are not the answer for working people in Britain, and they are not the answer for Scotland. Sir Keir also spoke to delegates about the situation in Ukraine ahead of his crunch meeting with Donald Trump on Thursday. Nobody wants the bloodshed to continue, least of all the Ukrainians, he said. But after everything they have suffered, after everything they have fought for, there can be no discussion about Ukraine without Ukraine, and the people of Ukraine must have a long-term, secure future. After Sir Keir's conference speech, Mr Farage says, how dare Starmer talk to us about jobs? Scotland has lost more than 70,000 jobs linked to the North Sea as a result of government net zero policies over the past decade. The remaining 30,000 workers directly employed in the North Sea and 90,000 jobs supported by the spending of oil and gas workers will be the cost of his net zero push. Starmer's disastrous budget kicks in on April the 1st and will cost even more jobs in Scotland because of his national insurance contribution rises imposed on businesses. Meanwhile, Anas Sarwar has said there will not be an independence referendum even if pro-independence parties form the government after next year's election. Speaking on the BBC's Sunday show, he said Scottish Labour would prove the pollsters wrong in 2026 and win the election. He added there will be no independence referendum in the term of the next Parliament and that other issues should take priority. We believe the focus of the next Parliament has to be clearing those NHS backlogs. Having that national emergency, the focus has got to be stopping the government's addiction to waste. Labour will fight to win the trust of the people of Scotland and win the election, he said, adding, on the issue of the referendum, people will see over the course of the last 4 years, I'm not going to turn my back on any Scot in terms of how we build the case for a stronger, better Scotland, he said. We might ultimately disagree on the final destination for Scotland. I don't support an independence referendum. I don't support independence. That will be the position in our manifesto. Responding to the comments, SNP MSP Stuart McMillan said, it is not for Anas Sarwar, Sir Keir Starmer or the Labour Party to determine the future of Scotland. That power is fully in the hands of the people of Scotland. The SNP will continue to set out a better alternative, demonstrating how independence can allow us to properly tackle the challenges facing people in Scotland and build a better, fairer, more prosperous society for everyone. And that article was written by Andrew Learmonth and read by me, Ian. From the Herald Scotland, Sunday, 23rd of February 2025, from the news section. Man who scammed in-laws out of £1.8 million with football business deal, jailed. By PA News Agency. A man has been jailed after scamming his in-laws out of £1.8 million with a fake business deal he claimed to have forged with football club Paris Saint-Germain. Edward Blackmore, 45, dishonestly claimed his company, OGC Sport Investments, had agreed a multi-million pound services contract with the French team in August 2018, Wiltshire Police said. He then used the fabricated contract as assurance of income to secure loans from his in-laws and a finance company, scamming both out of £3.4 million in total. Blackmore, of Holt, Wiltshire, forged the stamp and signature of a lawyer to make the contract believable, the force said. His family described him in victim statements as a grandiose narcissist who had carried out a calculated betrayal. Using the £1.8 million interest-free loan from his in-laws, Blackmore purchased a Grade 2 listed house in Widcombe, Bath, and assured them the loan would be repaid shortly. He forged his wife's signature on an associated tenancy agreement to purchase the house. Claims that money from PSG had been paid into the wrong account and the bank had frozen the payment were used by Blackmore to stall repaying his in-laws over the next 18 months, Wiltshire Police said. Only £76,000 out of the £1.68 million bridging loan from a finance company was also paid back, leading to Blackmore, his wife and their young children being evicted from the house before it was sold. Blackmore's in-laws, who were never paid back, reported him to Action Fraud, who referred the case to Wiltshire Police's complex fraud team. He was charged and pleaded guilty to 3 counts of fraud by false representation, with 2 relating to fraudulent claims against his in-laws and 1 against a finance company. Blackmore was jailed for 6 years and 8 months at Swindon Crown Court on Friday, Wiltshire Police said. Blackmore's mother-in-law said, Mr. Blackmore's deception has had a profound effect on our entire family, physically, emotionally, psychologically and financially. We continue to struggle to comprehend the utter betrayal having embraced Mr. Blackmore into our family. Emotionally, my trust has been broken and I feel totally betrayed by this grandiose narcissist. She said the scam had denied her and her family of fulfilling their retirement plans, adding, Mr. Blackmore's total lack of remorse, respect, explanation or apology is simply incomprehensible to us and totally unacceptable. He has left a trail of destruction, and we are the ones now having to pick our way through the mess. Blackmore's wife, who has since filed for divorce, said, When I exchanged wedding vows, I believe I was entering a partnership built on trust, honesty and mutual respect. Instead, I became the victim of a calculated betrayal that has shattered my life. She added, His impact extends far beyond me. My children have been silent victims. Their home was taken away from them. The future I had planned for my children has been stolen. However, I will work hard to rebuild and restore everything he has destroyed. DC Rachel Fairbairn said, Blackmore betrayed not just his wife and children, but his wider family too, depriving them of financial freedom. As with so many complex frauds, the lies from Blackmore were seemingly endless, well beyond the securing of the very substantial loans from his in-laws and the finance company. And that article was written by PA News Agency. From the Herald Scotland, Sunday the 23rd of February, from the news section, Unions welcome Labour's £200 million Grangemouth investment. Article written by Andrew Learmonth and Josie Harrison. Sir Keir Starmer has pledged to set aside £200 million in the National Wealth Fund to grasp the opportunities of Grangemouth. Speaking at the Scottish Labour conference on Sunday, the Prime Minister said he hoped private sector firms would work in partnership with the UK Government and come forward with an extra £600 million of spending. The party has come in for fierce criticism of the future of the refinery in recent months, including from some of their own politicians. Brian Leishman, the outspoken MP for Grangemouth and Alloa, told the Herald on Sunday that he was heartbroken at the inaction and the inertia shown by the UK Government. Unions representing the workers at the site held protests outside conference venues earlier this week. Petro Ineos, the joint venture between Ineos and PetroChina, who own the 100-year-old refinery, first announced plans to close in November 2023. They said the plant's future as an import terminal would require significantly fewer people to operate, and there would be a net reduction of approximately 400 roles over the next 2 years. Some workers at the site received redundancy notices earlier this month. In his speech on Sunday, Sir Keir told delegates at the Glasgow's SEC, "We will grasp the opportunities at Grangemouth, work alongside partners to develop viable proposals, team up with business to get new industries off the ground, and to attract private investors into the partnership we need," he said. "We will allocate £200 million from the National Wealth Fund for investment in Grangemouth. An investment in Scotland's industrial future, that's the difference a Labour government can make, because you all know what happens if we don't win this race. It's written in the fabric of every community in this nation, the skilled jobs that disappeared, the communities that lost their place in the world. Not just the security and the dignity of their work, not just their pride and purpose, their identity." Speaking to journalists after his speech, Starmer was asked why the UK government had taken so long to act. He said, "Well, last year we were in opposition, so obviously we had to win the election. And then I was very mindful of the commitment I made going into the election about the importance of Grangemouth, and that we would make sure we supported the brilliance of this industrial base in Scotland. What I wanted to do was make sure that we took time to work up a credible proposal for the future. It's very easy to put proposals on the table that don't hold water." He said this was not just about creating something that tides people over, but about working up a generational opportunity for Grangemouth. "There's £200 million on the table from the government. That is to be a partnership with the private sector. We're looking for 3 times that much coming from the private sector. That is a huge investment in Grangemouth. That is the future of Grangemouth, an important part of Scotland for generations to come, and I'm really pleased that we've got to this place." The Unite Union said it welcomed the announcement as a step forward in the right direction. However, its statement warned that the devil will be in the detail and said that the funding should be the start of a real industrial plan for Grangemouth that both safeguards Scotland's energy security and delivers jobs of the future. Unite General Secretary Sharon Graham said, "This is welcome news after months of our campaign, and supported by the community of Grangemouth. Keir Starmer and the UK Government have finally listened. This needs to be the start, not the end, in delivering a real workers' transition for Grangemouth." Following this announcement, it is essential that all stakeholders come together to put the meat on the bones, and that this investment counts for jobs in our security. Clear timescales will be important, as well as details on jobs. Earlier this week, John Swinney announced that the Scottish Government would commit £25 million to establish a Just Transition Fund for Grangemouth. He welcomes the Sir Keir's announcement. He said, "I welcome this response from the Prime Minister to my call earlier this week for the UK Government to provide its fair share of support for Grangemouth. It is a step in the right direction, and this funding must be made available immediately. On Tuesday, I announced that the Scottish Government is providing £25 million to enable businesses to bring forward investable propositions for Grangemouth. Everyone working at Grangemouth's refinery is a valued employee with skills that are key to Scotland's net zero future. We will continue to work constructively with the UK Government to secure the site's future. And the article was written by Andrew Learmonth and Jodie Harrison and read by me, Ian McKenna.
From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 24th of February 2025, from the Voices section. Brexit reality warning from senior Labour figure heartening. Article written by Ian McConnell. The UK economy has been firmly in focus in the last week. Sadly, there has been nothing to lift the spirits on this front in terms of the outlook. That said, it was heartening to hear Mayor of London Sir Sadiq Khan point out again the reality of Brexit, at a time when so many of his Labour colleagues would apparently rather avoid talking about the major ongoing impact. His colleagues' reluctance is no real surprise, given the red lines of Sir Keir Starmer's administration in terms of not rejoining the European Union, single market, or even the customs union. Sir Sadiq pointed out the simple truths of Brexit as he made the case for a youth mobility scheme between the UK and EU. This is, of course, an eminently sensible proposition, given young people in the UK have been deprived of so many opportunities by former Conservative Prime Minister Boris Johnson's hard Brexit, the key elements of which have essentially been embraced by the Labour government. Sir Sadiq told the EU ambassador and the UK ambassadors to the 27 member states of the bloc at a meeting last Tuesday that Brexit continues to have a negative impact on the country. And he highlighted his view that closer relations between the UK and EU could act as a counterweight to moves by US President Donald Trump to impose tariffs on goods exports to the world's largest economy, some of which are being pursued already and others talked about. Sir Sadiq declared, "I'm a proud European and of the fact that Brexit was a mistake that continues to have a negative impact, not just on my city and country, but on the European community as a whole." His latest intervention is unlikely to loosen Sir Keir's embracing of the key elements of the Tory hard Brexit, loss of frictionless trade between the UK and its largest trading partner, and the ending of free movement of people between the country and the European Economic Area. However, it is important that high-profile figures such as Sir Sadiq and people in general continue to shine a light on what Brexit continues to do to the UK and its economy. The UK economy's weakness has been very much in the spotlight this month. Data from the Office for National Statistics, ONS, on February 13th showed gross domestic product edged up 0.1% quarter-on-quarter in the final 3 months of last year. While slightly better than had been expected ahead of publication of these figures, that is cold comfort. Interestingly, when the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee cut UK base rates by a quarter point to 4.5% earlier this month, 2 MPC members, Swati Dhingra and Catherine L. Mann, voted unsuccessfully for a half-point reduction. Detailing the thinking of these 2 members, without attributing the thoughts to each of the policymakers, minutes of the meeting note, "For one member, a more activist approach at this meeting would give a clearer signal of financial conditions appropriate for the United Kingdom. For the other member, the subdued outlook for demand remained consistent with CPI, Consumer Prices Index, inflation staying sustainably at the target in the medium term." Figures published by the ONS last Wednesday showed annual UK CPI inflation jumped from 2.5% in December to 3% in January, taking it even further above the 2% target set for the Bank of England by the Treasury. The largest upward contribution came from transport, specifically motor fuels, as petrol prices rose and also airfares. There was also a sharp rise in prices in the food and non-alcoholic beverages category in January. Mark Swanell, Chief Economic Advisor to the EY Item Club think tank, highlighted upcoming challenges on the inflation front. He said, "Though inflation will likely dip over the next couple of months, we expect a renewed pickup from April. The energy price cap is set to rise by more than 6% in April, so the energy category is expected to provide upward pressure to headline inflation from the spring. Having only made a partial recovery since the turn of the year, weaker sterling should push up prices in import-intensive categories such as food and core goods. Meanwhile, businesses are likely to pass on some of the rise in labour costs caused by the increases in employers' national insurance contributions and the national living wage. However, Mr Swanell added, January's higher reading for services inflation was widely anticipated, and it's unlikely the MPC will have seen much in the ONS inflation data to concern them. We expect the MPC will continue with its cut-hold approach to loosening policy for now, with the next rate cut likely to come at its May meeting. Sarah Coles, head of personal finance at stockbroker Hargreaves Lansdowne, declared that inflation is back to behaving like a caffeinated flea, bouncing higher in January after December's bigger-than-expected fall. She declared that higher inflation won't have made for easy reading for the Bank of England. However, Ms Coles added, GDP data will also be fresh in its mind, and the fact the economy grew just 0.1% in the 3 months to December will mean the bank won't want to keep rates too high for so long that growth stagnates entirely. On balance, a March cut is looking even less likely now, but we're still likely to see a couple more cuts as we go through 2025. The weakness of the UK economy makes Sir Sadiq's observations about the continuing damage being done by Brexit all the more apposite. That article was written by Ian McConnell and read to you by Elizabeth. From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 24th of February 2025, from the Voices section. Free transport for everyone in Glasgow. Enough is enough. Article written by Mark Smith. I was at the pub with some chums recently, and we know how to have a fun night, so we were talking about the provision of bus services in Glasgow. It turned out I was the only one who pays for the bus, because everyone else in the group was either under 22 or over 59. I was not pleased. I banged my fist on the table, causing a little of my Guinness to spill over the edge of the glass. Enough is enough, I said. No more free stuff. My antipathy to free stuff, or too much free stuff, is based, I think, on solid principles. The government should support people who need help, but the government shouldn't support those who aren't in need and can pay their own way. This has the dual benefit of focusing the resources we do have on those who need help the most, while also keeping public spending, and therefore taxes, as low as possible. It's not exactly DOGE, but it is common sense. Sadly, common sense seems to have come under considerable strain in recent years, with the Scottish Government providing benefits regardless of whether people need them or not. Prescriptions, tuition fees, baby boxes, winter fuel payments, you know the score. Because there's no means testing, millions of pounds is going on free tuition fees while cuts are made to education, and millions of pounds is going on free prescriptions while the NHS struggles, and so on. Money that could be going directly to public services is going on universal benefits instead, people who don't need it. The same applies to buses. Bus services are under strain. There are fewer routes in the communities that rely most on public transport, and the cost of tickets is rising. And yet everyone under 22 and everyone over 59 travels for free, whatever their circumstances and whatever their income, and it means a considerable cost for the taxpayer. In 2023 to 24, the under 22 scheme cost some £189 million, and the over 60s scheme cost around £156 million. That's a lot of free bus tickets. The First Minister's defence is that there's a social contract by which those with the broadest shoulders pay more in tax to fund universal access to free university tuition and prescriptions, as well as concessionary travel. But this is entirely the wrong way up. What actually happens is that people who can afford to pay for their prescriptions and so on, the ones with the broadest shoulders, get services for free, and the cost is covered by other people who earn much less than them. It's unfair. It's upside down. It lacks common sense. Unfortunately, the logic of this doesn't appear to be getting through. Indeed, on the issue of buses, it seems to be getting worse. We've just learned that Glasgow City Council, budget black hole £50 million, is launching a pilot providing free universal public transport, i.e. no one pays anything at all for the buses, the trains or the subway. Not the under-22s, not the over 60s, not the 22s to 60s. 1,000 people will take part in the pilot, and it will last 9 weeks. Cost £225,000. The council, again budget black hole £50 million, appears to be pretty pleased with itself over the idea. It says the scheme will be Scotland's first universal free public transport pilot, and that 1,000 adults will be able to access transport free at the point of use to test the social, environmental and economic benefits. This points to what its supporters think free travel is all about. It'll encourage people onto public transport, it'll help towards net zero, it will reduce poverty, and there will be other social and economic benefits when people come into town to go to work or college or the shops. But as with every public policy, the potential benefits must be balanced against the costs, and free public transport fails the test. It may encourage more people onto the buses. Of course it will, it's free. But as for the social effects, the evidence is questionable at best. Edinburgh City Council recently called on the government to restrict the under-22 scheme and remove bus passes from young people who are guilty of antisocial behaviour, because it looks very much like providing free transport to teenagers has led to an increase in vandalism and verbal and physical abuse on the buses. The other argument about helping to reduce poverty is more convincing, but only for free bus travel, not for universal free bus travel. If reducing poverty is a primary aim of public policy, as it should be, we should be focusing the policies on those who are in poverty, rather than spending money unnecessarily on the well-off as well. Indeed, universal free transport specifically undermines the aim of tackling poverty, because much of the money that could be targeted and spent on those most in need is being spent on the ones with the broadest shoulders that John Swinney talks about. All of this might be fine if the policy was cheap and cheerful and didn't cost very much, but we know that's not the case. As we've seen already, the combined cost for the under-22s and over-59s was £345 million for 1 year. Glasgow City Council, budget black hole etc., also tell us that their free transport pilots for £1,000 will cost the best part of £250,000, and that providing everyone in Glasgow aged 22 to 59 with free public transport for the same period would cost at least £95.7 million. Expensive, firstly, but also unacceptable given the questionable and marginal benefits. But I guess we're stuck with the pilot now, so good luck to the 1,000 people chosen to take part. If I were them, I'd jump on a bus or a train or the subway and make the most of the £225,000 and have a jolly nice time for 9 weeks. Unless I'm very much mistaken, the pilot will also report back that the people who took part thought it was a marvellous idea and felt that all the free travel really boosted their social life and that there were many social, environmental and economic benefits. This was always going to be the outcome because a pilot of this nature has a destination in mind from the start and is never going to conclude free transport for all is a bad idea. But as I pointed out in the pub the other night, with Guinness pooling round the bottom of my glass, it is a bad idea, as all universal benefits are a bad idea because resources are finite and should be targeted at people who need help the most. I too will be entitled to free bus travel in a few years, but I'm happy to say I do not need it, I do not deserve it, and I should not receive it. I also hope that, in time, the gap between idealism and realism, the very expensive gap, will force the Scottish Government, and Glasgow City Council for that matter, to accept the truth. How long it will take, I do not know. That article was written by Mark Smith and read to you by Elizabeth.
From Herald Scotland, 17th of February 2025, from the STEM section of the business section. Rockets made in Lanarkshire should reach space next year, company says. Article by Neil Puran. A Scottish company aims to send its rockets into space from 2026, following an attempt at a suborbital launch later this year. Skyrora is building its first 23-metre rocket called XL at a factory in Cumbernauld, North Lanarkshire, with the goal of sending small satellites into space. An attempt to launch a smaller rocket called Skylark from Iceland ended in failure in October 2022, when a software problem led to it falling into the sea just after liftoff. A number of companies are working to become the first to launch satellites into space from European soil, with several planning on using Saxavord Spaceport on the Shetland Islands. At least 2 hope to carry out launches by the end of this year, while a spaceport in Norway is also preparing for a launch attempt. Germany's RFA is thought to have the most advanced plans, and it was officially licensed for spaceflight by the regulator last month. Another German company, High Impulse, also has plans to launch from Saxavord, as well as the US-based ABL Space Systems. Orbex, based in Forres in north-east Scotland, also recently announced it will switch its first launch from Sutherland Spaceport to Saxavord. It hopes to blast off its Prime rocket for the first time towards the end of this year. Alan Thompson, Skyrora's head of government affairs, said the Glasgow-based company is keen to carry out its next flight attempt from the UK, where its factory and testing site are based. He told the PA news agency it hopes to launch Skylark, which will not deploy satellites into space, as a proof of concept from Saxavord around this summer. Though discussions with spaceports owners are ongoing, he said, "We are hoping to get the fire testing done by the end of the year. If we are fortunate, then hopefully we will get launch windows for next year for XL." He said 2026 is the realistic timescale for launching XL, which can carry up to 315 kilograms to a sun-synchronous orbit. Its first stage will use 9 engines firing together, and Skyrora aims to do its first test firing of the full stage in the second half of this year. Ultimately, the company wants to achieve a regular schedule of launches, going from 2 or 3 initially to as many as 6 after a few years. Mr. Thompson told Westminster's Scottish Affairs Committee earlier this month that the company had chosen Iceland as the site of its first launch attempt due to regulatory delays in the UK, saying it had got tired of waiting. The committee heard from a number of figures in the space industry who hope to tap into a lucrative global market for small satellite launches. Scott Hammond, Deputy Chief Executive of Saxavord, said work is ongoing on the integration hangar, where rocket stages will be joined together and satellites mated to the vehicles. He told the MPs they are absolutely planning on a launch this year, adding staff are now going through a detailed training process. Mr. Hammond said, "Our aim is to have all of that done by July the 1st, after which, the second part of the year, we are now ready for launch." And that article was written by Neil Puran.
That concludes this week's edition of the Herald Scotland podcast. Please remember to subscribe to our channels, review, and to tell your friends about our service.